1. Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began a study involving hundreds of black men in Macon County, Alabama. The researchers wanted to observe the progression of untreated syphilis. The participants were not properly informed about the true nature of the study. The most disturbing part came later. Even after penicillin became an established treatment for syphilis in the 1940s, the men were not provided adequate treatment through the study. Researchers continued observing the disease instead of making treatment the priority. The study continued for decades and was finally exposed publicly in 1972. The consequences were devastating. Participants suffered serious health complications, some died, and spouses and children were also affected. The study became one of the most notorious examples of unethical medical research in American history. It also contributed to major changes in research ethics, including stronger requirements for informed consent and protections for human research participants. 2. Nazi medical experiments. During World War II, Nazi doctors conducted numerous experiments on prisoners in concentration camps. People were subjected to experiments involving extreme cold, high altitude, infectious diseases, drugs, surgery, sterilization, and other dangerous conditions. The prisoners could not freely consent. They were treated as experimental subjects rather than human beings. Some experiments were designed to investigate questions relevant to German military medicine. Others were connected to Nazi racial ideology. The conditions were often deliberately dangerous, and many victims died or suffered permanent injuries. After the war, several doctors involved in these experiments were prosecuted during the doctors' trial at Nuremberg. The trial became historically important because it helped establish the Nuremberg Code, which emphasized voluntary consent and other principles for ethical human experimentation. The horrifying lesson was that medical knowledge without ethical limits can become a weapon. 3. Guatemala syphilis experiments. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S.-supported researchers conducted another deeply unethical study in Guatemala. Researchers intentionally exposed people to sexually transmitted infections as part of experiments investigating prevention and treatment. The victims included vulnerable groups such as prisoners, soldiers, sex workers, and psychiatric patients. Many participants were not properly informed and did not provide meaningful consent. For decades, the full story remained largely unknown. In 2010, researchers investigating historical records uncovered the experiments, bringing the case to public attention. The U.S. government later formally acknowledged what happened and apologized to those affected. The Guatemala experiments demonstrated something especially disturbing. Unethical research was not limited to wartime concentration camps. It could also happen within institutions that were supposed to protect public health. MKUltra. During the Cold War, the CIA secretly conducted a research program known as MKUltra. Beginning in the 1950s, the program investigated whether drugs, psychological techniques, hypnosis, sensory manipulation, and other methods could influence human behavior. Some experiments involved LSD and other psychoactive substances. The most controversial aspect was that some people were exposed to these substances without their knowledge or meaningful consent. One tragic case involved CIA employee Frank Olson, who was unknowingly given LSD in 1953 and later died after falling from a hotel window. Many MKUltra records were destroyed in 1973, making the complete scale of the program difficult to determine. Later investigations and congressional hearings revealed enough surviving documentation to demonstrate the program's disturbing nature. MKUltra became a symbol of how secrecy and national security interests can collide with basic human rights. 5. Willowbrook Hepatitis Study. In the 1950s and 1960s, researchers conducted hepatitis studies involving children at the Willowbrook State School in New York. The institution housed children with intellectual disabilities, and overcrowding created serious health problems. Researchers wanted to understand hepatitis and investigate possible methods of prevention. But some children were deliberately exposed to the virus as part of the research. The ethical problem was enormous. Parents were asked to provide consent, but critics argued that the circumstances surrounding the institution created serious concerns about whether consent was truly voluntary. Because Willowbrook had limited space, parents sometimes faced the possibility that their children would not be admitted unless they participated in the research. The controversy surrounding these studies became part of a much larger debate about research involving children and vulnerable populations. It helped demonstrate why vulnerable people require additional protections when researchers conduct experiments. 6. Holmesburg Prison Experiments. Starting in the 1950s, dermatologist Albert Kligman conducted numerous experiments on prisoners at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia. Inmates were used in research involving chemicals, medications, skin products, and other substances. Some participants were paid, which created another ethical problem. Prisoners had limited economic opportunities, so financial compensation could potentially influence their willingness to participate. The experiments continued for years. Kligman later became famous for his work in dermatology and helped develop products and treatments used outside the prison. But the Holmesburg research raised difficult questions about whether prisoners could genuinely provide voluntary consent and whether researchers were taking advantage of a vulnerable population.